Shalom. Back again with the Orion. The road from Orion. Chapter 14. I'm going to get it together here. The undark, whatever name we give it, is not large within man as a shriveled up nature or a stratified history. It is, in relation to man, the other that is not only a brother but a twin, born not of man nor in man, but beside him, and at the same time in an identical newness, in an unavoidable duality. The Order of Things, Michael Foucault. And Quixote continued, I will explain the idea of the moth later. Let me digress by saying that man in the modern age from 1800 on is a mutation. Yet man's shadow has followed him, alien as it is to him. Some call it the other, yet it is a twin born at the same time. This real doubleness is man's shadow that he forgot about when he emerged into the modern age of knowledge. I had trouble swallowing what he said, but I recognized it as something the philosopher Michael Foucault might have said. So based on my respect for the French thinker, I considered the idea that the last 2 centuries of human existence was a mutation. Seemed to me that man had achieved some great frontiers in the field of knowledge, the trip to the moon, if the lunar photos were not a technological farce. Most certainly the invention of the auto, through scientists predict that air pollution from carbon dioxide will force planetary temperatures up 3 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit by the year 2100. Well, maybe legal remedies for racial, gender, and sex discrimination, despite the legal system's inherent weakness of keeping conflicts inflamed by favoring the rich above the poor, whites above other races. What about a higher standard of living through the production of wealth? Although poverty still exists everywhere in the world, I would have to say that digital communications is a positive development, specifically the internet. If we learn to use it responsibly, the power of literature, music, and art to herald the future of humanity certainly is important. If we could understand the ultimate meaning. This last thought disturbed me, for it seemed that death was not only the absolute meaning of the dream, but also the ultimate revelation of artistic creativity. Could you define what you mean by mutation? I asked, somewhat frustrated. After a short pause, Don Quixote said, fundamental forms of knowledge change that have made. After a short pause, Don Quixote said, fundamental forms of knowledge change that have made Western man alien to himself. For instance, civilized man has lost the art of thinking in images. Yet this This symbolic language can still be found in dream and imagination, and the legacies of early cultures such as Egypt, the Aztecs, and even the peyote dance rite of the Aboriginal Tarahumara Indians of northern Mexico. Western man needs to unveil and decipher the signs of their symbolic language and learn from these cultures. Certainly, I thought that Quixote must know how complex symbols can be. John had explained the problem to me several times. The only way to pin a meaning on one symbol, say the symbol of the twin, would be to look at many examples of it in ancient works. Once this is accomplished, there is still the problem of interpreting the meaning of the other symbols within which it is networked. A complicated task, call it an archaeological perspective, if you will, where you would have to dig up the meanings of all symbols, making sure they were consistent with your original interpretation. In this way, one could understand what the symbol originally meant. This is one difficulty with symbolic interpretations, but another remains in modern society. In modern society, we take symbols literally, and we are indoctrinated with beliefs based on interpretations that take symbols literally. Let's take the apple in the Garden of Eden as an example. To us today, it is exactly that. An apple that God did not want Adam and Eve to eat. Actually, the apple points to multiple symbolic meanings: sensual taste, pleasure, desire, substance, exalting materialism, totality, and the wholeness as indicated by its round shape. It is difficult to classify the meanings of this forbidden sensual apple exactly, but when a group of symbols point to the same idea, it is possible that we can understand. So, to understand the symbolism of the apple, we would have to look at all the symbols in the story: Adam, Eve, the serpent, the trees. This opens up deeper levels of meaning and overcomes barriers of language. Finally, we must remember that the apple and all the other interpreted symbols refer to the spiritual world, not our sensual reality. It is not an actual apple on a tree. I paused, wondering if Quixote was interested in decoding the sign of the twin, If this is what he had in mind, then maybe he would take the journey together. I could use a guide to track down the theme they all wrote about, the one that made them mad, the one that may have misinterpreted the crucial theme of the other. The other questions came to me. Did Don Quixote know that I was narcotized by the white powder and was seeing Cervantes' literary work in images to understand its messages? Did he know I was in a nightmare of works of art that were speaking to me, taking me on a quest to answer my questions about the jester who was sending me my thoughts? Directly, Quixote said, "Yes, Psyche, I realize you are thinking in images. Now, what we need to do is unveil and decipher this idea of the twin in art, literature, mythology, psychology, and in all the human social discourses to find out who is sending you your thoughts." Amazed again at his knowledge and my own refusal to see his powers, I knew I had to accept that he was reading my thoughts and get used to our new mode of communicating. "So where do we start?" I said to the jester. Quixote's wise eyes were penetrating My line of work requires a knowledge of everything, he said. We will find the truth. After this witty remark, we traveled in silence on Rosinante, trotting through the dreamy green hills of the countryside until Quixote's nag came to another damn fork in the road. To the south, I could hear forcefully rhythmic thuds over falling water and the clanking of chains that immediately adrenalized me, making me feel as if something might strike me down or grind me senseless. Understanding why Sancho had a bowel movement when he heard the thuds, I calmed myself by remembering that in the book, this sound was produced by the great hammers of water-powered fulling mills, pounding wool fibers into felt. Quixote noticed my fear, but he just stared at me. I found myself wondering if he was going to claim that mill was a giant, as he had in the book, or see the mill for what it really was, just a windmill. I was relieved when Quixote turned his horse Rosinante north down the other path, but very annoyed when he pressed me to talk about the beastly sound. Psyche, why were you so tense when you heard the mill? For a brief moment, I could not answer, trying to understand what it was about the sound that inspired fear in me, or to be more exact, an unidentifiable terror. Something about the monotonous pounding, those relentless thuds coupled with the clashing of chains made me feel unspeakably dread, coldness, a hopelessness that was difficult to put into words. It reminded me of Mahler's Sixth Symphony, where the orchestra recreates the horrid sound of God striking down a man in three shocking waves of orchestral deafening orchestral dissonance. Mahler completed his dark work in 1905 during one of the happiest periods of his life, yet his intuitive genius enabled him to foreshadow future horrors, the World War battlefields, Auschwitz, Gulag, Rwanda, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, devastating prophecies that proved man was losing touch with his humanity. The hammer blows at the mills reminding me of Mahler's three sudden symphonic explosion, which was so terrifying that modern orchestras pity their audience and only play two of the terrible discordant strikes. The awful mill reminded me of death and defeat. Shaken and despondent, I understood that Quixote wanted me to consider the innate meaning of the mill without letting my emotions sabotage my thinking. He was asking me to take it literally as an actual mill, but to define what it signified. Again, I reminded myself that the windmill was a sign of something else, an image of something beyond the physical that had to be considered without emotion and within the full context of the story and all its symbols. It was obvious that the mill symbolized something dark and deadly in the spiritual world, some spiritual truth, but I could not get a fix on it. What disturbed me more was what I sensed Quixote knew the symbolic meaning of the mill. In fact, it was obvious that he knew a code that would crack the meaning of all the symbols, but the valorous knight was not going to tell me. It crossed my mind that his code could be similar to Lucia's. I pleaded with him, "When are you going to tell me the code so I can understand some of these symbols in Cervantes' novel?" Quixote responded, "Where one door is shut, another is open," and he spurred Rosinante soundly, allowing the horse to go whichever way it chose. used to the folly of his master, Rosinante galloped north and then west, full speed over the terrain toward the setting sun. Whether the horse was blinded by the bloody sunlight or just stupid is not something I wish to pursue, but for no reason Rosinante balked insolently, catapulting Quixote and I into the cool air where we hovered miraculously, suspended as we were from our bizarre vantage point to see the dark crimson whirling mills illuminated by the dying sun. The awe-inspiring red giant ground and pounded the waters without remission. Then, in one hard, suffocating moment, the horizon rose up to engulf us, crushing us with severe acceleration as we fell into a deep subterranean cavern along with the horse Rosinante. All right, fam, that's the end of my reading of chapter 14 of The Road to Orion. Thank you for bearing with me, and I'ma holler at y'all later. Peace. Shalom.